Welcome to this review of ASHEN, where we will be discussing gameplay and a bit about what you can expect if you get your hands on this title. So, just on the surface, when we look at ASHEN, we find a game that's very much made in the Souls-like genre. You have your currency, which you use to upgrade your character. You have your version of the bonfire, where you unlock fast travel and you replenish your health. And of course, you have your difficulty curve, which ASHEN is quite a difficult game, and we'll touch on this again in the review. Also, very apparent is the style of ASHEN. You got a very minimalistic and cartoony sort of style that I think really separates ASHEN from the other games in the market. Also, quite to stand out compared to other titles is that ASHEN has very open environments. The environments in which the character plays are large. There's always a lot of space to move around on the field, especially when you come up against enemies. It sort of changes the dynamics of the combat. So, whereas in Souls you have very limited space to maneuver, in ASHEN you have far more to sort of dodge out of the way and roll to safety, and to sort of just keep your distance from your enemies and strike when it's right. I think ASHEN is a difficult game, so you can expect to die often, but on the downside, the difficulty is quite sort of irregular. By this I mean that certain parts of the game are very easy, so you'll have little issue knocking over some of the weaker enemies and those sort of moments. But then these really easy areas are interspersed between very difficult zones. So whereas you would expect a game to go up sequentially in difficulty, ASHEN is a bit different in its curve. It's more choppy. It goes from easy to difficult, back to easy, back to difficult, and that's how it goes until the end of the game. I think combat is what we expect from a Souls-like game. You have your heavy and light attacks. You also have your heavy and light weapons. Heavy weapons obviously hit harder than the light weapons, but they're also slower. And the light weapons hit lighter, but they're much quicker. You also have a variety of weapons, not too many, but enough to keep the variety there. So you have machete-like weapons, you have clubs, spears, and axes. Spears are quite useful because they can be thrown at enemies from a distance, and they also, at a later part in the game, help you to traverse the environment. You have your stamina meter, which you must keep an eye on at all times. You use the stamina for obviously dodging, rolling out of the way of enemy attacks, and for blocking. The enemies are interesting. They come in various shapes and sizes, from very small humanoid-like enemies to large giants to spiders and various cave dwellers, and this variety of sort of enemy, and it's always enough to sort of keep you on your toes and keep the experience fresh. To speak a bit about progress, you level up your character by completing quests. The more you complete quests, the greater your town called Vagrant's Rest expands, which is very interesting to see your village expand as you play through ASHEN. You can also upgrade your character by finding feathers around the world. Finding these feathers will increase your stamina and health, and they're always very interesting to find because they quite off the beaten track, so you really have to look through the environments and take paths that you wouldn't normally take to find these feathers, and it's always very rewarding when you do come across one. ASHEN's a very good game, but it's not perfect. Just to speak a bit about criticisms, you have your bugs. So I came across a few things like floating weapons. There's a bit of clipping through the environment, and you get the odd movement. And well, I experienced the odd movement bug where my player would not be able to walk upstairs. You'll just stop in his tracks. Quite frustrating are the load times between deaths. You will die quite often, so you would kind of hope that the loading time between deaths wouldn't be long, but for ASHEN it can be on occasion. One loading screen wouldn't actually load, so I had to restart my my game, in fact my computer, because ASHEN doesn't minimize very well. Sometimes your companion gets lost. The game is very useful and it gives you a companion AI. You can also choose to put on multiplayer, by which another online player will also join you in your quest. But if you don't want that, you can turn that off. But the point is that your companion does get lost, so he's there one moment and the next he's gone. And he does come back, but he's always programmed to come back in certain situations. Like, for example, when you come up against 3 or more enemies at once, all of a sudden he'll appear there at your side. So he's not there all the time. I think the major weakness ASHEN has that will be especially disappointing for fans of Dark Souls is that the boss battles will disappoint. They're very easy. So, for example, 2 of the 4 bosses I've knocked over so far. The first 2 I beat on my first attempt, and the other 2 I beat in around 3 goes. So these aren't very challenging at all, and which can disappoint some players depending on who is playing. In fact, I find that some of the situations in the world when you're playing weaker enemies are actually tougher than the boss battles, surprisingly, and you'll probably die far more often there than you would against the main bosses in the game. Just to round off, ASHEN is a good game. It's quite a surprising title to be released, and I think I can definitely recommend this to any player, especially fans of the Dark Souls genre, or anyone just looking to have a good time, just bashing over some enemies and grinding through the toughness.